Hey, my name is Fred the Finch. You might know me as Ronald. I'm one of the best Yamatos in the game right now. And something I get asked about all the time is what's the best build? What build should I use? What's the easiest build? And just anything about builds. Obviously, playing a MOBA, builds are going to be very important. And in Deadlock, we have an in-game system to make and share builds, so it's really easy in this game. But it can be hard to tell what build is good and what build might not be. So today, I went through every single top Yamato build, then we ranked them based on laning phase, middle, end, ease of use, AP, and how fun they were to use. Obviously, this is going to be my opinion, and there's no real correct answer to a build, but I have a ton of Yamato games, and I'll try to explain why I give a rating rather than just giving you a number. But for the best information, don't just look at the numbers that I give, look at why I give them and what my thoughts are about it. This idea was inspired from Deathy, who did the same thing for Haze and then Infernus. So all credit goes to him for this. And go check out his YouTube and his Twitch. I believe he's doing this for every character, or at least for a lot of them. And one quick note, I won't be ranking my own build since I'm obviously biased and that would be my number one in every scenario. But I did tweak my build a little bit after playing all of these, as I figured out what I felt was strongest after trying out multiple different playstyles. Anyways, let's get into it. We're just going to start with the first build that we use, and then go in order with how I played them. And how we're going to do this, I'll just be going through each of the ratings from the laning phase, mid phase, end of game, and then we'll talk about the abilities, ease of use, and fun. And in the background, you'll just be seeing any highlights from that game. Keep in mind I only played 1 or 2 games from each build, so highlights is kind of an exaggeration, but they'll be playing in the background for you to see how it plays and how it felt. With how my ranking system worked, I went through each build and I ranked them 1 through 9, 1 being the best and 9 being the worst in each of the different categories, and I averaged out their number to get their average rank. The first build we used was the Yamato Gun New Era build, which is the only gun build in this list, which, if you know me, I do not like playing Gun Yamato. I don't think it's good, I don't think it's fun, I think it works completely against how Yamato wants to play, but we gave it 2 games, I gave it my best, and let's see how it went. So for lane, this build is one of the classic gun cultist rushes, where you just get a few tier 1s, and then you go straight into cultist sacrifice, and try to get that big buff early on. The problem is that they changed cultist sacrifice, so the buff is very minimal at the start of the game, and then scales as it goes on. So with builds that rush this item, it's so much worse early and you feel way weaker than you usually would when you were rushing it beforehand. It's still not the worst, but compared to other things that you could build, I don't think it's really worth it, and the build doesn't really offer much else to go off of and to work with, so this gave us the lowest ranking for the laning phase at 9. And the nature of it being a gun build, we were actually able to take a walker super early, and that is a big merit of running something like this. But I think the real issues of the build started to come into fruition around this point when we entered into the mid game and left the laning phase. As we go into the mid game, I feel that this is when the build kind of really falls apart, where it's not sure what we're prioritizing, and it kind of goes all over the place. It has some good ideas, where strong items like Fleet Foot and Fury Trance, Kinetic Dash, Slowing Bullets, even Point Blank is a good item, but it also has some weak points where these items don't really mesh together well, and I feel that the cohesion just doesn't really come together, as well as it just missing some really strong items that would make Gun Yamato builds really strong. So things like slowing bullets and point blank kind of double dip into that slowing effect, where you could get something like Berserker or Burst Fire to either amp your fire rate a ton or amp your gun damage. And then this build also has a big emphasis on the split shot plus ricochet, and I don't believe that that is a strong item combo really at all in this character. Split shot will make it easier to hit your shots on enemies, but she has a shotgun, so I don't really think it is that beneficial. And you don't get to hit multiple people super often, so you don't get the amp super often. And then Ricochet is an item that I also don't feel is super great on her, where your main purpose is to just simply run down one person. Overall, I think that this build lacks a lot of cohesion and a real goal, and for that reason, it once again got ranked at number 9 for the mid game. Going into the end game, it's really hard for a build to really come back from already being so poorly constructed, that it just can't really be saved by anything, so once again got ranked at number 9. This is easily the weakest I've felt on Yamato in a while, and I really think if you wanted to make a gun build on Yamato, you have a lot better options that would be more valuable. Ease of use is the real saving grace of this build, where it has a good amount of utility options as well as late game options that are each annotated very well, and even all of the different categories have a little bit of a description to tell you what you're looking for and what you're playing for. So it does actually explain very well how to build and use it. And this build actually got ranked second for ease of use. Moving on to ability points, this build once again struggles a lot for me, where it prioritizes maxing your grapple rather than maxing your Crimson Slash. While the max grapple does give a lot of base damage, it is almost antithetical to how the abilities should be used, where you want to use your 2 to chase people down, to close gaps, and to do things like that. But when you use it for a buff, this forces you to use it early and to waste your only chasing ability in order to just get a buff. Where if you max your 3 first, you have a super strong, consistent heal on a very low cooldown. Other than that, I do think the AP is good, but I think that that weakness just throws it so far behind every other build, and that's why this once again got ranked at 9th. And finally, in terms of fun, this is going to be the most personal and opinionated section in the whole thing. And for me, it was once again 9th. I just can't imagine a world where anybody really enjoys playing Gun Yamato, where you're just holding W and walking at somebody with a shotgun. It's never an enjoyable experience for me. Overall, this was by far the worst build that I tried, and it ended up with an average rank of 7.8, with the only category that wasn't the absolute worst being the ease of use. So moving into the second build, we use Kari's 1v11 Spirit Yamato build. This is just a classic Spirit Yamato with reverb and a heavy focus on slash. This build uses most of the classic items for the lane phase, with heavy focus on spirit and poking. So if you're going to use this build, it is a little bit less brawly and a little bit more pokey than some other builds, where you don't have any melee items, but instead you have some spirit items as well as mystic shot. So, although this playstyle is very different from what I would usually run and what I think is strongest, I do think the lane is very strong, and so it got 3rd place in our rankings. And then going into the mid game, this build is just a tried and true straight up spirit build. I felt very strong with this build. I didn't really have any issues running it. I do think it does have some inefficiencies, such as Spirit Shredder Bullets just being a generally lackluster item in my opinion, as well as Spirit Lifesteal being overshadowed by Locket, but it is still a very strong mid game, and Spirit Burn is the first tier 4, is very strong, and allows you to skip Heal Bane in order to save a slot while still doing a ton of damage, and further yourself up ahead in souls. Because of this, the 1v11 build got rank 2 in the mid game. Going into the late game, this build once again just stays tried and true to the classic Spirit Yamato, picking up Reverb, Refresh, Infuser, even escalating sometimes. And like with the previous sections, it does as you would expect it to, and it does it well. Because of that, this once again got ranked 3rd in the end game. In terms of options, it's not super clear when exactly you should buy each of the different situational items, but it does give a general idea of when to buy them, especially for the extension items, and there's a small enough amount of situationals that it's not super difficult to understand when to buy them. So because of the general linearity of this build, plus the small amount of simple situational items, this build also got 3rd for ease of use. In terms of AP for the 1v11 Spirit Yamato build, it starts off very simple by just maxing your slash, but then they run into the issue where you don't level up your Crimson Slash at all until after maxing your ult and getting your range on your grapple. So you don't actually have any consistent healing off of your 3 until way later in the game, and I think just changing that simple AP could fix this build a lot. And then finally, going back to fun, this is just a run-of-the-mill, normal, classic Spirit Yamato build, which is very fun, and because it works well, it is still enjoyable to use, so while it didn't do anything crazy, it did well, and it got 4th in the rankings for fun. Overall, like I said a few times before, this build was a rather run-of-the-mill and basic Spirit Yamato build. I think it works very well. I think that the title is a little bit misleading. To me, 1v11 seems like you're going a little bit more brawly, but this build felt a lot more pokey than something else I would usually build, where you didn't have any melee items, especially in lane, and you had just a little bit more poke. And obviously that's fine, and it works great, just something to keep in mind if you're trying to use it. Overall, this build got a 3.8 on the rankings. The third build we move on to is Iaido Technique by Dexy, which is a build that is based off of mine and is pretty similar to mine with some small changes. Starting off in lane is once again just another classic Spirit Yamato build with some regen, some damage, a little bit of movement, and a lot of good optionals that are really well suited to fit each different game. While it is very simple, I do think that simplicity is often some of the best that you can do, and especially with how flexible the lane can be with this build, they ranked first in all of the builds for lane. Moving into the mid game is when I think this build struggles the absolute most. Where it has some of the classic items such as Kinetic Dash, Superior Cooldown, Torment Pulse, and Reverb, it also dips into some odd items that don't really fit for me. While it buys Healing Booster and Fortitude, and even Return Fire, it doesn't actually buy any lifesteal or consistent healing. So while Healing Booster can be a very strong item on Yamato, I really don't think it fits in a build like this where you don't have any other outside source of healing until Reverb. I think the simplest solution is honestly the best in this scenario, where you should just take out Fortitude and replace it with something like Spirit Lifesteal or Locket and slot it in a little bit before Healing Booster, and then call it a day. And to explain why Fortitude isn't the strongest item on Yamato, what makes Fortitude strong is it allows characters to have almost 100% uptime on the map, where when you run around and you rotate, you're regenning health, so even when you go to gank people, you don't have to go back to your base and heal. The problem is, on Yamato, unless you have your ult, you're not a very strong contender in any fights. So when you're running around full HP with no ult, you're not actually much stronger than if you weren't full HP. So in my opinion, Fortitude is just kind of a waste of money since you're investing in uptime that isn't really uptime because you're not a threat anyway. Because of all these things, the Iaido Dexy build ranks in 6th for the mid game. And then moving on to the end game, this build has a lot of different options that are all very strong and all very well explained. It has a lot of different offensive options as well as defensive options, just depending on what you need. So overall, this build is great in the end game, and it got second in the rankings. In terms of AP, this build starts off pretty normally, maxing Slash, getting tier 2, 3, and then maxing ult, but then instead of going back and getting the range on your grapple, it just instantly maxes the Crimson Slash. I think this is interesting, and I think this works pretty well, but you definitely do miss the range on your grapple, so I don't think it's the absolute best. This build got 4th in the AP rankings. And finally, in terms of fun, this build is a very strong spirit slash focus build with a lot of different options depending on the different games. So it's super fun, super interesting, and can be different every single game. For me, this build got second in the fun rankings. With that being said, the overall average ranking of this build was 2.6, and the biggest detriment for this one was just the mid game. The next build we went with was the Wolfie 7 build. Wolfie is a European pro player, and in my experience with pro players, they generally have bare bones and basic builds that in my opinion, are not very often very strong, especially in pubs. That being said, let's move on with the rankings. For Wolfie's laning in his build, he starts off with just a lot of melee items and then a lot of damage. In my opinion, this really misses the mark of what you need to do in laning, where you're gonna be trading a lot of blows in lane, and you're gonna inevitably take damage. So having the only healing is melee lifesteal for the early game, I think it really struggles, and it especially struggles against those pokier lanes like Mirage, Talon, and Vindicta, where you're inevitably gonna take damage and you're just gonna slowly whittle down and die. Because of that, Wolfie's build was ranked 7th for lane. And then going into the mid game, it generally sticks to a more basic spear build still. However, I think it does miss a few things as well here. Tank Buster very early, I think, is a really big issue. With how Tank Buster works, it really doesn't contribute a ton of damage unless players consistently have over 2,500 health, in my opinion. I think having Debuff Remover as a core item is also a miss, and I think Arctic Blast as your first tier 4 is a really big miss. The reason that I don't find Arctic Blast to be the strongest item for Yamato is just simply that it doesn't do enough for her. Where Arctic Blast gives you a 15% damage bonus for 0.75 seconds, unless you're in ult, you can't actually take advantage of that damage bonus with your slash, just because it takes too long to charge it up. So while you're in your ult, you do get that 15% extra damage bonus, you don't get it outside of ult, and you're missing out on a lot of that. It also gets a little bit better scaling, but most of the time you don't have a ton of spirit power until later, so you can't take advantage of that until later. It does, however, have true CC, which can be very helpful against a lot of different characters and provides a lot of utility for you. However, while I don't think these items are the absolute best, I do think that they work well and they are going to consistently get value. So, Wolfie does get 5th in the mid game, and you will still feel strong. And then finally, as we move into the late game, I think this is once again a struggling part for this build. While I think it has great items in the build, if you simply follow it left to right, I believe this build just gives you too much utility and not enough offensive pressure. When you spec so much into debuff remover, Arctic Blast, Spirit Burn, you're getting a lot of utility, but you miss out on some damage that you might want from Refresher and Reverb, and you really don't get those until your 4th and 5th tier 4s here. So in my opinion, that's where it really misses out, and this build falls to 8th in the endgame. However, moving into AP, I think this build is super strong. It starts off with 1 point in your Crimson Slash, and then immediately maxes your Power Slash. A good amount of builds in this video are going to get tier 2 Crimson Slash, and I really think that's just a miss right now, where it only gives 6% of your max health. It is a really strong heal, but early game it just doesn't give enough value for me. So this 1 point to reduce their fire rate by a ton is still a lot of value, and then immediately prioritizing the Slash. It then just goes to the basic ability upgrades and finishes out well. For me, this ability path was the best of all the builds and got first in the ranking. Then going back to fun, I think that this build once again struggles. Because of the weak lane, I think it can be hard to build up any momentum on this build unless you're absolutely destroying your lane and you have a really easy matchup. And then if you're not ahead, the lack of offensive pressure in the end game really shines and shows just how much you're lacking and you can't really kill anything. So for me, the fun is 7th in this build. And overall, this build ranks at 5.8. The next build that we used was the ABL build. This is another European pro player, and this build is the most offensively orientated build that we have played. To start off with laning, the ABL build is fine. It prioritizes tier 2s more than tier 1s and has some nice power spikes in there. It's not the best, it's not the worst, but it does have some survivability, it does have some damage, and it does have some poke. It checks all the boxes that you need, but it's not the strongest in my opinion. So for that, ABL's lane ranked at 4th. In terms of the mid game, I think this is where ABL's build clearly struggles the most. His build feels like something where you want to build up into a very strong and dominant late game by just permanently farming and creating a large lead ahead of other people. So while I think his build does execute what it needs to, I don't think it feels great to be fighting people during that time. And I really feel that this mid game could be easily helped by simply adding Spirit Lifesteal or Restorative Locket, as well as upgrading Spirit Sap into Silence Wave. He has Spirit Sap in there, but he never upgrades it into Silence Wave, and I believe that Silence Wave is just clearly stronger and a very great item, and I don't understand the reasoning for never upgrading it. Because of that, his mid game ranks 7th. And despite the poorly ranking mid game, or honestly because of the poor ranking mid game, you're able to spec super offensively in the late game and you do a ton of damage. With Spirit Burn, Arctic Blast, Reverb, you have a ton of spirit stacking, you just absolutely nuke people, and if you have a big lead and you have the advantage and you can take good fights and you're strong mechanically, you will absolutely destroy people in fights. I do think it is missing consistent healing, but other than that, you are an absolute menace. The ease of use is almost completely identical to Wolfie's build, where there are some situational items that aren't really explained at all. It's mostly linear, but when you are expected to buy something else, it doesn't explain when or why to buy them, so the ease of use does fall down pretty low, and it is tied with Wolfie's at 7th. And then for the AP, this is a very classic Yamato AP leveling, where it's max slash, tier 2 3, tier 2 grapple, max ult, max Crimson Slash, and then max grapple. It's nothing crazy, it's nothing different, but it is very strong, it is very consistent, and for that it ranked 2nd. And then finally, in terms of fun, this build was so much fun to use. It was really annoying to use in the middle of the game, and it really does lack some consistent healing, but once you get online, you are so strong and you do so much damage, and it is an absolute blast to use. Because of that, this ranked 1st for fun. And through all that, this build overall ranked at 3.6. This is the second best ranking build that I played. So, the next build that we used was the best Yamato build period. And as you'll find, this is probably the worst title that's ever been made. Anyways, it starts off in lane alright. It has some healing, it has some damage, and it has a little bit of movement. However, I think that the order is super off. It doesn't really make sense to run extra regen so late. It doesn't really make sense to have extra stamina so early. And I also think that it has too much healing. In Restorative Shot, Mystic Regen, and Extra Regen, I think it's just too much, especially with healing right as an optional. Mystic Regeneration is also one of those items that's just super underwhelming on this character for me, where you really want it on a character that's constantly doing spirit damage to multiple characters. Yamato just doesn't really do that. And then the last issue is just how many tier 1s and tier 2s there are in this build. And that's going to become a bigger issue later, but just something to think about now. Because of all that, this build ranked 6th in the lane. Moving into the mid game, this build just spams a ton of tier 2s that aren't upgraded from the actual items that you built, so you quickly run out of slots and it becomes a real issue really fast. You need a flex slot by the time you have Spirit Shredder bullets, and you have 11 different items by the time you get to Torment Pulse. Obviously, you can sell Restorative Shot pretty early, and this build just really struggles with flex slots. With the bloating of items in this build, another issue that you're going to run into is just how long it's going to take you to get to things like reverb. One of the most important things about making a build is figuring out when you're going to hit your power spikes and making those power spikes as early as you can without sacrificing the rest of the game. This build does the exact opposite, where it spams a ton of tier 1s, a ton of tier 2s, and 3 tier 3s before even getting to reverb. So by the time you get it, it's going to be way less impactful. And then the last issue for the mid game is just the existence of Radiant Regen. Especially after the nerfs, Radiant Regen just doesn't really compare to something like Spirit Lifesteal or Locket for me. While it will heal more, it costs twice the souls, and a lot of the healing is very slow healing over time, as well as healing out of combat that is significantly less impactful than something like Locket or even Spirit Lifesteal. The best Yamato build period ranked at 8th for the mid game. Moving into the end game, it starts by picking up some classic Yamato items like Mystic Reverb, Refresher, Superior Cooldown, but then it goes and dips into some odd items like Stamina Mastery and Healing Tempo. I think it really messes with these two, but even after that, things like Boundless Spirit, Spirit Rend, or Witchmail, I don't find to be super core, and I think you have better options generally. So for the end game, this really misses for me. While it does have some good core items, it also has a lot of weird items that don't really work with what you want to be doing. And for that reason, the end game ranked 7th for this build. Then coming in for the ease of use, this build is generally linear with a big stack of situational items in the bottom. These items don't have any annotations or tell you when to buy them at all, and you're really going to be having a hard time fitting them into the build in general just because of the slot issues in this build. So while it does have some good options in the situational section, it doesn't really tell you when you should build them, and for a new player, this wouldn't really help at all. So for me, this ranked at 9th for ease of use. This build has the same AP as the ABL build, and for that reason, it tied for second in the AP rankings. And in terms of fun, this build was unintuitive, this build lacked slots, this build lacked damage, this build lacked almost every single thing that I would want in a Yamato build, and so for me, this ranked at 8th for fun. And with that, it brings the average ranking for this build to 6.6. The next build that we used was the Iaido Spirit build. He is a North American pro. He has a lane that prioritizes mainly tier 2s over tier 1s. Gets a little bit of healing out of his tier 1s and then focuses more on offense with his tier 2s, as well as one of the shielding items for defensive value. I do generally prefer to get a few tier 1s, but this did work really well, and the pressure you have with Cold Front, Mystic Shot, and Enchanters, plus the defensive value of weapon or spear shielding, did work really well, and this lane is really strong. For that, Ido's lane ranked in second. Moving into the mid game, because you focused a lot on tier 2s over tier 1s, you go into the mid game rather strong and can build up a good foundation of damage in order to catapult you into the late game, so you feel very strong just building things like Torment Pulse, Superior Cooldown, Improved Spirit, and Burst. I do, once again, wish that this build just had some consistent healing, whether in Spirit Lifesteal, Restorative Locket, or anything of that nature, but because of the way that the lane was built, you still do feel very strong in the mid game, and because of that, it ranked first in the mid game. Then moving up into the late game, this build is rather unorthodox, and rather than going for Refresher, Spirit Burn, or even Reverb, this build opts for Colossus, and then goes back for Tank Buster and Spirit Snatch. While this is very unorthodox, this does work well and you become a very tanky pain in the ass to deal with. So while it is different, it is strong, and this build ranked for 4th in the endgame. In terms of ease of use, this build is definitely middle of the road, where it is rather linear, and with the situationals, it gives a general idea of how many to buy, but it doesn't usually tell you when to buy them or what situation they're best in. So while it's not the best, it's definitely not the worst, and for me, it ranked in 5th for ease of use. And when it comes to AP, this build gets tier 2 3 before maxing slash, and then going for range on 2, and then maxing ult as usual. Well, I don't think this is terrible. I think that on this patch, with the 6% max health healing on your 3, I don't think it's super worth it to upgrade it that early. So for me, that's a weak point of this, and this build ranks at 6th for AP. And then in terms of fun, this is just classic Spirit Yamato with a little bit of a twist at the end. And while I don't think it's as fun as Reverb or Refresh, it is fun to play something different, and it is interesting. So this build ranked at 5th for fun. And with that, the Iaido Spirit Yamato build averaged at 3.8. And then moving on to our next build, we have the Hydration build, which is once again another NA Pro. And his build is similar to Iaido's, where he prioritizes tier 2s a lot more than tier 1s. I think it's okay. I think it prioritizes Healbane a little bit too much, and I think it could have done with the tier 1s a little bit earlier, but it's obviously not bad, and it's going to get the job done. So for this build, it ranked at 5th in lane. Moving into the mid game, this is honestly just super classic Spirit Yamato with Torment Pulse, Spirit Lifesteal, Spirit Cooldown, Tank Buster. It's nothing new, it's nothing generational. I think Tank Buster is too early, and I think there are things that you could do to make it better, but it's gonna work. It's gonna get the job done once again. This build ranked at 3rd in the mid game. And then into the late, you have Reverb and then Escalating Exposure. And while I think Escalating Exposure is a lot better than it was pre-shot patch, I really don't think you should get it unless you have something like Spirit Burn. If you have something that can consistently proc Escalating Exposure and build up those stacks, then I think you can benefit from the damage amp. But with only Reverb and maybe Torment Pulse, I just don't think it stacks up to other tier 4s, and I think that's obviously the biggest miss of this build. This build also doesn't feature Refresher anywhere in the build, and once again, I think that's a really big miss. However, the other late game items are good, and you are going to get value from them, so it's not terrible. For me, the end game of this build ranked at 6th. In terms of ease of use, this is another linear build that is quite simple, with a small situational option in the bottom. It does tell you when to buy debuff remover, but it doesn't tell you when to buy anything else. It is easy to use, but it lacks a little bit of flexibility, and for that, this build ranked at 4th for ease of use. And then for AP, it does the exact same thing as the Iaido Spirit Yamato build, so it ties in the rankings and ranks at 6th. In terms of fun, it's just a normal Spirit Yamato build. There's really nothing different from it than any other build you could find, even pre-shop patch. So there's not much else to say. In terms of fun, I ranked this as 6th. And so, with that, this build averaged at 5 in the rankings. The final build that we tested out was the Iaido Punch Yamato build. Starting off in lane, this build immediately went from extra regen to Mystic Shot, and then immediately up to Express Shot. While Express Shot is super strong and can add a ton of burst damage to your kit, I do think you can struggle a lot in lanes when you're saving for a tier 3 like this. So while if you play it correctly, your lane can still be strong, you can find yourself struggling a lot. Because of that, I rated this build at 8th in lane. Going into the mid game, this build starts to look almost like a Spirit Yamato build, and then immediately pivots into a full melee build. You start with things like Cold Front and Locket, Healing Booster, and then you start buying Melee Charge, Berserker, Weighted Shots, and Crushing Fists. The mid game of this build honestly felt pretty good. It was very different from playing a normal Spirit Yamato build, but it did feel reasonably strong, especially as Locket with your healing with Healing Booster in the back, and your max 3 giving you a ton of healing on a low cooldown. And if your enemies don't know how to parry, you'll kill everyone. So this build ranked 4th in the mid game. And then finally, moving into the late game, it's the same story where you're super tanky, you do a ton of damage, And if people can't quite figure out how to parry you, or you can outplay them with your melees, you absolutely destroy people. Especially with the extra melee distance of Crushing Fist, people are really surprised by how far you can go and forget to parry a lot of the time, so it makes it even more unpredictable. There's not too much to say about this, but if you can outplay people with your melees, or they're not very good at parrying, this build is going to absolutely destroy, and if you are getting parried, you're going to get absolutely destroyed. For the end game, this build ranked at 5th. In terms of ease of use, it's the same story as the Iaido Spirit build, with some situationals that aren't explained when to use them or when they're good, but it is quite linear and not too hard to use, so this tied with Iaido Spirit build at 5th. In terms of AP, this is the most unique build by far in this video, where you immediately max your Crimson Slash, and then go and get range on 2, max your ult, and then max your 2 before maxing your Slash. While it is super different, it works really well for what the playstyle is and really complements your melee playstyle. So I think this was a good ability order and it ranked 5th in our rankings. In terms of fun, I think this was a super fun and interesting build to use. Melee playstyles in general can be super volatile and fun, especially when you're winning. However, I do think it would get a little bit boring after playing it for a while, so it ranked in 3rd for fun. And overall, that puts the Iaido Punch Yamato ranking at an average of 5. When we go back to compare all of the builds that we played today, by far the worst was the Yamato Gun New Era build. It ranked at an average of 7.8. Following that was the best Yamato build period, which averaged at 6.6, and then next was the Wolfie build, which averaged at 5.8. Then we had a tie between the Hydration Spirit Yamato and the Iaido Punch Yamato, which averaged at 5th. Then we had a big jump to the 1v11 build, as well as the Iaido Spirit build, which averaged at 3.8, followed closely by ABL, which averaged at 3.6. And the best, most well-rounded, flexible, and easiest to understand build that we played today was the Iaido Technique Yamato by Dexy, which averaged at 2.6. In general, the best way to play a character is to find a build that resonates with you and makes sense to you, and then make small changes that fit your playstyle the best. And I think easily the best build to do that with would be this Iaido Technique build. However, if you are a more advanced player and you just want the best results quickly, I would say out of these builds, the ABL build would do the best for you. Hope you enjoyed and learned something from this video. I would love to hear any of your thoughts, questions, or comments down in the comments in my Discord or even in my Twitch or YouTube chats where I stream almost every day. And also, let me know of any videos you would like to see from me and tell me what your favorite build was. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.